Welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who's rolled out those lazy, hazy, crazy days of summer.
Tim Longo.
How you doing, sir? It's turned to be summer since the last time we spoke.
Solstice, yeah, and it had a really high heat day here in Seattle, and a rarity, and nobody knows what to do because it's so hot and we're not equipped, just like we don't know what to do in the snow.
Yeah, no, I know my coworkers on Tacoma had 100-day heat, over the weekend.
Yeah, Portland was even worse, I heard. Yeah,
and they were pretty much in the same place where they're like, I just don't know, I'm just gonna lie here and hope that death comes.
Yeah. So yeah, summer is here, and
whereas it is here unseasonably cool. It's been in the mid-70s, so it's actually kind of beautiful in Maryland. It's May, but it's the end of June.
Nice.
So yeah, climate change, folks. You make your own decisions. Anyway, let's move on to Half-Life.
Final episode of playing.
Our final episode of playing the game. We left off at Lambda Core because I hadn't quite gotten all the way through it. There was more to it than I realized, which we'll talk about when we get to that. But and then we go to that special place. And we'll talk about that as well.
Special place.
The special place. The special Half-Life place.
God, it's just such an infamous section of a game. I feel like anybody who's played that game, even of its time or after the time, has something to say about it.
Yeah. Or have blocked it out of their memory.
Yeah, it's just so funny. And we'll get to it, but you mentioned it wasn't as bad as you remember it.
No, it wasn't. I mean, I wouldn't say it was good.
No, but it's become this legend in a way, at least in the development community. I think it's unfair, but it's just funny how it has, had, and I think part of it was not to jump. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm all over the place, but part of it was because Half-Life 2 was so good. You know what I mean? And you kind of had this sense when you finished Half-Life 1, you're like, most of that game was brilliant. But then what happened? They kind of fell apart. Right. And then Half-Life 2 comes out and you kind of are rejuvenated. Okay, yeah, right. These guys know what they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah, no, it's weird. Yeah. It's its own thing. But let's first, one of the things you kept alluding to last time, and you didn't want to, I guess spoil it for me or whatever, was the Lambda Core teleportation puzzle.
Yeah.
Which is kind of at the heart of that whole level. What you had talked a lot about last time or the time before or whatever was about how the levels were committed to individual ideas.
Yeah.
And the individual idea, the motivating idea of Lambda Core is these little teleportation, I don't know, auras, electrical discharges. It's not really clear what they're meant to be. They're just clear signposts of if you walk into this, you'll come out somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting though. You get a little bit. I wrote a note about jumping ahead to Zen that they kind of give you a little bit of backstory on teleportation in that level, right? As you kind of discover some of that, where it might be coming from, and how Black Mesa harvested it or something. So I'll come back to that later. But anyway, I mean, I think the interesting, some points that I wrote down about Lambda Core that were takeaways for me, especially of this era, because like we talked about, every level in this game was trying something different that many shooters hadn't really done or tried, and I think, again, part of its charm. And with Lambda Core, definitely ambitious, and teleportation was obviously with fragging and with telefragging and things like that. It was not a new concept within shooters, but they made a puzzle out of it, right? And as Brett said, it's sort of a universal theme for the level. The trick, though, as we talked about also last time, well, actually, in probably every episode so far, is the concept of like the fully connected levels, right? Where you see your end destination, and then it's all about kind of figuring out how to get there or what have you, and how some of them do that better than others. In this one, I felt like very ambitious, but one of the challenges that with teleportation gameplay, and I wanted to talk about Portal in the same breath. Really, this is, they have a window at some point where you get to sort of see your destination, or you see the tower of that rotating tower, right, where there's all those kind of intermixed teleportation layers or whatever you want to say, right? And so you're like, okay, I look at the top of that thing, that's clearly where I have to go. But the problem is, unlike the other levels, you don't get to see ever really a fully connected... they didn't do a great job at landmarking, I guess, how the connections work, because you're moving from floor to floor, you're looking through different windows at different times, and you're seeing different slices of that tower, but then sometimes I think there's even another room with another kind of tower. And so the teleportation language between, like, there is a slight difference between kind of a coming and going teleport effect.
Now I actually think that I might have played that particular section differently.
Oh, no, really?
Because the way you describe it, like, I only went and I jumped my way all the way to the top.
The first time?
No. I mean, it was multiple steps, but I never left the tower once I entered the tower room.
Oh, really?
So there might be multiple ways through this.
Well, I was using... So there's the numbers on the doors...
Right.
In each of the layers, right, as it's rotating, right? And each number goes to a different place. And one of the numbers brings you higher in the tower. But if you go to the other numbers...
Oh, interesting.
If you go to the other numbers, they take you to a different room. And the only reason to do that really is to get more stuff. There's no
I didn't do that.
Oh, you're telling me...
So there's a teleporter in the center. There are teleporters at each level in the center of this tower.
Yeah.
And they teleport
that's what I'm talking about.
Right. They teleport you up one level.
No, it depends on what door you go through. If you go through...
Oh, I only went through the doors that would take me up one level higher.
So you just happened to
go through the right numbers? No, I didn't happen to. There was only one door where you could see the other teleporter, the teleport location, and you had to time it so you could drop onto a cylinder thing going around.
Sure, fair enough. If you...
So I noticed that, and I didn't even realize that if I went in somewhere else... Oh, you know what? I did do that once, and I fell.
And you weren't sure what was happening.
And I wasn't sure what was happening. And I think after that, I then fell into the radioactive crap that was at the bottom of that room, or got run over or something like that. And I died and went back.
And then
after that, I was more carefully saving. Okay, I got up another level, I'll save.
Still, you had to pick the right first one.
I did
first
have to
for that to work. Yeah, I mean, definitely, the visual telegraphing of where you're going to teleport to, your destination, the line of sight design was pretty good in that regard. However, my point is that if you didn't, you clearly didn't know the numbers meant anything, and I didn't for a while. I figured it out eventually as I tried to problem solve. But if you go through any of the wrong numbers, and you're basically teleported all over the level, because every layer has 3 doors. And it's the same teleporter. It's a little bit like the indie level that I did in Infernal Machine, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay, I guess I didn't make that connection. I thought I was just jumping and falling to my death within the tower, because it's very disconcerting. There wasn't
that happens too.
I teleported and I fell and I broke through multiple layers of stuff. I'm like, I don't know what's going on, and then I fell and died. And I'm like, that wasn't good. And so I instead focused on trying to be in a location where I could see where I was going to go.
Yeah, so that was intuitive for you then. That's a good thing. You still... Yeah, I guess my point is...
but I can see why it'd be frustrating, because the first one, definitely, I didn't know what was going on. And I think I did that a couple of times and died and was like, what is going on? And then I was like, I can see the thing above, and then I never made the mistake again because now I knew what I was trying to do.
Yeah, right. You were on your path.
It depends when you make the connection, I guess.
Yeah. Well, then, I mean, the core point here for me was that with the rest of the game, they had already set up this rule set where the way that the level design was going, the way the connectedness of the level design was going to be, that there was sort of always this looping back around, right? Where you're coming to these rooms that kind of you see through a window where you're going to come to eventually, and kind of or you return to the same space, like in Blast Pit or something like that, where you're kind of returning and kind of refreshing your memory. And here, whenever you teleport, you're going to lose your sense of place, right? Because you're not sure. Because the landmarking, I guess, could have been better. It was all fairly the same color of a level. And so I'm just kind of pointing out that teleportation, cool idea, but extremely difficult to pull off in the kind of level design that they're doing. And then they added these other layers of rules that I was very frustrated on for quite a while because I didn't realize that, I thought I was going into the same portal in the central tower every time, but it turns out if you go through different doors, even though you're going to the same portal, it actually takes you to different places.
Yeah, so that is a weird choice because
it's very subtle.
It looks like one thing.
Well, then
I wouldn't say it's subtle. I would say it's dumb. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Fair enough,
right? Because it's.
Yeah, I mean,
the fact that it's different entryways, nothing walls it off. I mean, there's no.
No, it is dumb. You're right. It is. It's unfair. Yeah. Then it became.
It's very difficult to plan. I mean, one of the things that I really appreciate in a shooter, generally, is my ability to plan an attack for whatever, either whether it's combat or puzzle or what have you. I can do some planning. Like you mentioned the three, the Cthulhu thing with the spikes or whatever that would gonna bash you if you made any noise. Okay, well I can plan. Like, I've got this many grenades. I can plan,
for sure.
Okay, I'm going to I'm going to make this plan. I'm going to execute on it. Like, it's a competence, part of the feeling of, pleasure from this game. It's being competent. Yeah, you feel like, I came up with a thing and I did it. And I might have done it by the skin of my teeth. And at the end of it, I had 8 health. And, I don't know if I'm going to be able to continue, but I managed it.
Mm-hmm.
And teleportation completely in this case, especially with that multi-directional thing, which I didn't even figure out was happening. Right? Yeah. How do I plan for that?
I wonder how many people actually do. I mean, at least in your case, you found some correlation to the line of sight, and you were able to plan that way, and then you made it to the top without having to do what I did. What ended up happening to me, which always happens to me in situations like this, is I become obsessed with all the permutation. So I was like, okay, I see what I probably have to do to actually get to the top, but now I need to know what's in the rest of these doors. So, and there's 3 per level. Well, 2 extra ones per level, right? There's a real one and then 2 extras. So I went through every door. And there's probably like 3 levels or something. Yeah, and all it does is bring you to these rooms here and there, and it kind of loops back. So it's actually pretty complicated level design, but because of the teleportation mechanic, you get discombobulated too easily, too quickly. If there was a rule set of like the numbers correlated to some other number that I could have seen in the other rooms, I never saw it. It's in the level designer's head, at least. They thought
the other thing I'm curious about is like, how did you get back at that point?
Well, I just had to find the patterns, right? So they did have a semi-clever loop of, in every one of those side rooms that you go into, there is a portal in the quote-unquote end of that room that brings you back to the bottom of the tower room again. So you're always brought to the same place.
Now, the other thing I have to ask is, who builds a building like this?
Well, so the only headcanon that I had for it in that regard was they are experimenting on teleportation, and so they built a tower to utilize all the permutations that they were experimenting with, and that was efficient as a scientist.
And so they built these rooms and they walled them off.
No, it doesn't make any sense. No,
yeah, it makes sense.
No, it's not. And some of the portals are in the weirdest places. They're like in a duct room and like there's no reason unless I don't know. Maybe there was an accident and their portals are everywhere or something.
Yeah, it's hard to say. One of the things I did appreciate was at least they introduced you to the concept that you were going to be teleporting. There's a couple ways. I mean, when you first kind of get into the main area of this thing, there's a Barney in a little office, and you can break the window and get in. And get
that was good. Yeah, I wrote that note down too.
Yeah, and then you can go off to
safe room.
The left side. Yeah, there's basically a safe room, very much like what they've done in that zombie thing.
Left 4 Dead.
Left 4 Dead. So you can be there, and then of course he's there, and he'll kind of fight stuff if it comes down that hallway. You go out, you fight some stuff, and you can go to the left and look through a window and see the G-Man go through a teleporter. So you're like, oh, there's something. That's how this guy's getting around everywhere, for one thing. Because if you've had the opportunity to see him multiple times throughout the game. And then, going down that hallway further on the left, there's a little room where you can kind of go in on one side of a teleporter and come out on the other. And they're right next to each other in these little enclosed rooms. And you can only do them in a particular way, because the room on the far room coming in, you can't open the door. The near room you can. So you're forced to encounter it in that specific way if you want to even experiment with it at that point. So I did kind of appreciate those introductions. Yeah,
they've become very good at ramping people up onto new concepts like that. And not only that, but in Zen, right? Like it comes back. I guess I wrote down a silly note of just like the story of teleporting, in this game, and I just thought it was intriguing that it actually, I'd forgotten that there was a teleportation element on Zen at all as well, Right. But then the really quick, my final point, just kind of to bring up Portal for a second, I just wanted to quick mention to Portal and kind of the brilliance of that from a teleportation gameplay game. And hard to say if there's any learnings from Half-Life 1 for that, because we know that game came from Digipen originally and all that stuff, and they brought it over with Kim Swift and everybody. But anyway, the brilliance from a spatial relativity perspective for Portal for me, and then playing this and kind of seeing essentially a bad version of teleportation, and then you see a good version with Portal, is that the portals, you make the portals for one, you can see both portals, you know what the result of the portals, to your point, right? You can plan, you know what the result will be, and the level design in Portal, some of the best maybe ever, especially in 3D, that it generally, for the most part, the portal, the level design is such where you can never get yourself into a place where, the rooms, they're kind of like watertight rooms, right? The level design, for the most part, where it's this all-inclusive...
You mean test chambers?
Yeah, the test chambers are essentially watertight, where you can't, put one portal down and then run for 2 minutes outside into another level and then put another portal down. They're very much built in a way where you always are aware of what you're doing.
And the reason to do that is you don't want to lose the thread of in that time. And this is one of these things about human psychology, right? If you go through a doorway, this is a true thing. Your short-term memory is cleared. As human beings, this is a fact of our psychology. So
exploit this.
This is why you're in the morning, you're in the shower, you're having a shower, and you're like, oh, I've got to buy whatever, soap, shampoo, whatever, and you go out and you shave, and then you walk out of the bathroom, and now goodbye, soap, shampoo, forget it's not going to go on the list. You're not going to remember it.
This is a real thing. Come on.
This is truly a real thing. That when we go through more tightly enclosed spaces, basically a portal, our short-term memory clears itself.
Huh.
And it happens to me all the time. In fact, I know today that there was a thing that I meant to write down on my shopping list, and I haven't done it yet because only discussing it now has it come back to me. And that's a true...
I'm glad the podcast could provide that service for you.
Well, it's interesting because that's one of those things that I feel like we could make use of in game design that we don't.
Yeah, and I guess my point
is... You don't have to think about that stuff. We're just going to walk you through a door, and now you can forget all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just... They could have had similar rule sets to what you're saying with this level design, right? Exactly. They just chose to obfuscate it and kind of, port you around to different places where you had to really piece... It basically, to your point of planning, this is a trial and error level. There's no way you could plan and know where to go, so you just have to try it all. Right. And I'd reloaded a lot,
Yeah. So. Yeah. No, I think that's a mistake for sure, and it's, I would have been very frustrated had I not kind of lit upon a solution that worked for me.
Well, I was. It took me a while, yeah.
No,
all that being said, it was gratifying when you get to the top. It did, for me at least, it felt, it was silly that it was so convoluted, but it was nice to finally get there.
Yeah, I think you probably had a better payoff from getting to the top than I did, because you'd put more work into it, right?
Yeah, totally.
I just was kind of like, dumb timing puzzle.
Yeah.
That was kind of the level to which I ascribed any design to it. It was just like, this is stupid. I have to be in front of the right door to be able to see the next thing so I can time it right. That is interesting. Yeah, I at one point, I think I jumped, because there were like bars that would like knock you off and stuff. So I had to like jump, and then jump onto to the center and then jump onto another one. Like, it became a jumping puzzle just to get to a place where I could see what I wanted to do.
Oh yeah, and the reset is grueling for that too. Yeah. So interesting kind of 11th hour learnings before we get to Zen. 11th hour learnings of what not to do, which was, I had forgotten all about it. At this particular level.
Entirely. Yeah. And I may have done more exploration. I don't really remember. This section did not really leave a deep impression as far as that goes.
I love the visual and kind of like aesthetics design of the core, and this kind of teleportation tower was intriguing. Well, the interesting thing is if you explore more to the side rooms and stuff, what ends up happening is you get to each side room and you see the teleporters, the destinations, like through a grate or on the other side of a place you can't get to. Right. And you're like, how do I get over there? There's no way I can get over there. And then you realize it's one of those numbered doors on the tower.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I collected a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah. I'm sure you picked up like lots of health or whatever. Yeah. Although they do, one of the nice things about this level is they do basically give you a prep room before you go to Zen.
Right. That's right.
Like, there's a Barney and a scientist in there, and it's like, we'll hold the fort. You've got to go in and kill the whatever. And meanwhile, and they keep saying to you, make sure you pick up anything you need, and it's basically the point in the game where you're like, okay, you've got everything you're going to have. You just need to have enough ammo, and after this, we're not going to help you out because you're going to be somewhere else.
I love that little storytelling moment when you come upon those guys with the barricade and everything.
Right.
And they kind of initially they point their weapons at you, and then
Yeah. And they do the same thing they sort of do at the beginning, where you have to watch the scientist kind of walk around, path around this barricade, go to the door, open the door, and then he walks back and he starts telling you what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And it's just, that commitment we talked about of like this making a real place, and just as you're about to go to an unreal place, but making this convincing real place with, granted not a lot of high definition characters, but characters that have enough,
at the time, it was enough
to be really convincing, and to, and I think a lot of that actually comes from that behavior. Like, they don't do a lot of things, but the things that they do make a certain amount of sense, and don't feel weird. He's not waiting right there, by the door to open it. He's standing behind something just in case something breaks the door down. And so, of course, it takes time for him to go around. Right? They don't, even though that ends up being a little bit of dead time for the player, it's kind of useful dead time.
Yeah. It's pacing, right? And and Half-Life 2, they do an even better job. Like there's those times every time you get to one of those kind of resistance areas with the scientists and they're all talking to you and stuff, like those are long scenes where you're just in there watching them walk around and talk,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Like when you get the dog and all that stuff. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Was there more you wanted to talk about with the G-Man at this point, or you want to go to
No. I just wanted... We haven't talked about him much, and obviously he comes in at the end very heavily.
Maybe we'll touch him on at the end.
But the one quick thing I wanted to mention with him is my memory at the time and kind of the impact of this it was one of my earliest memories of a game that had this mysterious, very subtle and like minimalistic, minimally used character made such an impression on people because he showed up throughout the game in these really quick moments, and it was like you could miss him if you weren't looking in the right direction, and the commitment to that, which was also kind of rare these days. And then I mean, he's a memorable character that does almost nothing. You know what I mean? And people still talk about him today, and probably a lot of it is the ending, the very, very end, that there's a reason for that, but also just this threading, this mystery where you're filling in the blanks, and it's just the less is more kind of mentality.
I also think a good part of it is that he was a central part of the sort of Half-Life 2 campaign. They don't really have any characters to build this franchise on, right, at this point, and because they're going to introduce kind of whole new stuff when you go to Half-Life 2. So he's really the only memorable character that maybe even got out of this thing, and so you have the memorable ending with him, but then he was their facial animation demo for Half-Life 2, and you knew he was going to be a big part of the whole thing.
He's memorable too. He's just creepy.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is creepy. He also talks funny. I don't know what it was. Something about his delivery is very...
No, I wrote that note down too. They wanted...
very Lynchian, in a way. He feels like you'd find in the Black Lodge or something.
They wanted him to be, feel alien in some way or something, yeah.
Right. Like he's himself a hybrid. Alien-human hybrids. Now I'm definitely on the X-Files. Okay, I guess we should go into Zen. Let's dive deep into Zen. I totally get the impulse behind going to Zen. It makes a certain amount of sense, and like we kind of talked about last time, the world is kind of slowly merging in some ways. You see, not only do you have the aliens, but you start seeing things that you can't actually interact with, or you've got bits of alien technology that are now part of the environment in like the jump pads and stuff like that. So I get it. Like, I get the sort of arc that takes you to Zen, and at the same time the play arc feels totally broken by the time you get to Zen. I mean, in fact, one of the things they talk about, you have that room with that scientist who's like getting the teleporter going with the big electrical whirring discharge, and then you finally get those new flying creatures and stuff like that. I mean, he's like, well, you can go around and practice long jumping if you want, but you're going to have to protect me when I turn this thing on. That's like, oh my God. I mean, I've barely done any long jumping. And it's like, they're basically just telling you, okay, you're going to need to do this thing that maybe you haven't ever really been taught. Because I didn't do the tutorial, as you'll recall. I figured it out very quickly because I figured it had to do with the crouch.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
But I didn't do the tutorial, and there's no need to know how to do this anywhere else in the game.
Yeah, I think you do it like once in the tutorial anyway, but...
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, and so I didn't really have a good, grounding on this, and the controls of this game are not really built around the precision that you need for 3D platforming, which is what a lot of what comes next revolves around, of at least some of it, a sizable amount of it. So,
well, and at the very least they have some air steering, which I've forgotten about,
right? Sure.
Which you can correct yourself some, when you're maybe gonna miss. But yeah, it's that we've talked about it before, I think, but it's that age-old problem of ending a game where. And I felt it as well. Like, I think we've all felt it and made mistakes in this area too, where you feel like you need to up the ante by the end and shift things and mix things up and stretch your mechanics in places, unexpected ways to sort of surprise and delight the player. But that doesn't mean you should,
Right, Starfighter ended with a
great example. We totally messed that one up too. Like, that was Troy still hates me for it.
I get why we wanted to do it, and I get why these folks wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I look back on it and go, why did we put ourselves through that? And also Troy, for that matter.
The payoff has to be there,
right. And I don't feel like, the AI couldn't really support that space. for me, and I look at that and I'm like, because I played Starfighter a few years ago now, and I was watching that final level and I'm just like, oh my god, this pirate captain enemy looks like an idiot in this space. He's banging into everything. I'm like, why did we do this? This is nuts. And it was really hard to make it happen at all. So I don't know. But I get it. Like the story, you want the story to go in a new place for the climax, right? You want this because they kind of, like you said, like they've been doing these individual new mechanics every level. So, like, they've already been kind of ramping stuff up constantly in a way, right? Yeah. And so now it's like, okay, well, that's kind of our bread and butter. We always ramp things up every level, something new, some new focus. Yeah. And it's like, we have to do something bigger. Something has to be bigger for the finale.
Gameplay-wise, I think they just chose poorly, right? I mean, I feel like in Half-Life 2, you have the opposite example with the gravity gun as one big mix 'em up, at the end that wasn't done poorly, right? That was an on the nose, that is exactly what I wanted, at that point. Right. And they just got better at it, and so totally, and they just stretched themselves. And the other point I wanted to make, that as far as stretching themselves, that I guess the macro theme of, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think the problem is that there is no obvious natural thing like that in the rest of Half-Life. There is no gravity gun, and they're ramping up the weapons and things like that. But, Doom and Quake had already had their BFG and whatever the equivalent was in Quake, right? They had, that ultimate gun. And I get how it might have felt like, that's not enough. Like, other games have done the ultimate gun.
Yeah, maybe.
That maybe they got to that, they were getting to that point, and we're like, what we're going to do? We're going to push this in a different direction. And for them, that was kind of a weird, 3D navigation and platforming, and then a really weird boss battle, which we'll get to.
Well, and I guess, even Quake was dabbling with the movement and traversal mechanic side of things, right? By the time you get to Quake 3, you have jump pads and precision landing and rocket jumping, and so the elite players were definitely getting better at first person navigation oriented stuff. Maybe they felt that trend was important, for them as well. I just don't think it was dialed in enough. It's just too swimmy, and the friction wasn't really great, and you couldn't really the physics, you couldn't really predict your arcs that well, and unpredictable. And you mentioned different rooms seem to have different amounts of gravity, which confused you even more.
Yeah, even worse.
And you had to basically relearn all these rules when you come to this, which on one end, on paper, conceptually, that is a cool idea of relearning the rule set of the world. But you had to do it so quickly.
You have to do it quickly and in a totally different sort of space.
And highly lethal.
It's one thing to learn new rules, in a space that looks familiar. Where you might have some clues to what the rules might be. For example, the conveyor belts or the train tracker, I guess, really more accurately, where you have to shoot those things that switch the track.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that's a new mechanic, but we have something to hold on to there. We kind of, most people have a sense of how those things work. If they've ever seen a Western, where there's a train, they've probably seen that scene, or, or whatever, maybe something about a subway. So you have that, you're bringing something to it at that point. It would be one thing if we were getting some new rules in a space that made any sense. But you've got this alien geometry, you've got totally alien life, gravity is weird, and you're doing things that you haven't really done in this game, even though the scientists just told you you're going to have to do it. So I think it just is too much.
Yeah, it's
all
perfect,
at once.
Perfect storm. They tried. I mean, to their credit, a little bit, they tried to find some commonalities. They had their version, like the alien version of ducts, that you crawled through.
Sure.
They had kind of like a factory kind of motif with elevators and conveyor belts and vats of creatures and stuff, and so there were some correlations there, but yeah, it just it's stretched too far. And the other point visually
but even in those spaces, they have things that are not familiar. Like there's the place where the barrels are going that's like this blue light, and you've already learned that blue is okay because that's if you stand in the water, you heal. But if you go into the blue light, you're just going to get swashed by a barrel. Like, I mean, there's not a huge, even in the stuff that they have, there could have been a bit more consistency. If those had been red, like if those lighting had been red, I would have gone, okay,
that's a weird one. That's weird that because they usually are pretty consistent with that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a mix. You know, I totally get going there. And honestly, you know, one of the things I said in pre-show is this was not as bad as I remember it being. It wasn't as frustrating as I remembered it being. I certainly think there are areas where I found things this time that I was meant to find the first time that I didn't pick up on. And in particular, there's a place where you have to you have to jump onto a flying creature's back and ride it across this island, to this, through space and get to this other place where you can jump into a teleporter. But then there were things that I remembered that, and I hated that the first time, and I don't think I did it the right way the first time. There are other things that are just, like, not really easy to understand why they chose them at all. Like, in the first area that you land in, you have to do all these long jumps to land on platforms, which the engine's not particularly good at, that kind of precision jumping. You finally get down to a level where you can now move to the level below, and there's, like, things that just shoot electricity at you.
Yeah, you can't do anything about them, yeah.
And you can't do it. You just got to kind of, like, get away as fast as you can. And I died at that point several times, and I was like, oh, why didn't I save, why did I save before I jumped down here? Like, but you have no expectation, and that thing doesn't appear again. So it's like, they're throwing a lot of kind of spaghetti at the wall, and not all of it is sticking.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, related to the stretching point, kind of visually and kind of art design wise, the only point I wrote down there that I mentioned in pre-show is just this thing that I feel like we never quite, I feel like we never learn our lessons in this regard of, okay, we have this ambitious thing we want to do with our engine and with our team, and we've built up this expertise in this one area, but we need to stretch ourselves, so we're going to try this pretty different new thing with the same engine and the same team, and basically we're just not ready for it, or the engine's not ready for it, or it's just not time, so right. It's great to be ambitious, and I think games like this definitely push the industry forward, and it needs to happen, but you can go too far, and I think the brilliance of the first parts of this game up to this level were very clear. It's the engine was good at making human spaces with right angles and geometric, buildings and things like that, because you just need to rely on the essentially simple geometry and textures. But then you go to this place that's supposed to be fully organic, right? All sorts of round surfaces, technically should be, and something that we would probably be doing a better job of now, today, if we were actually to try it today, and maybe be more successful, but you just kind of got to know your limitations, and I feel like almost every game I've ever played has had something like that, where you're just like, we mentioned the end of System Shock 2 as well in pre-show, that had a kind of a similar feeling of like wanting to get wacky at the end, and it's like, well, you really don't have what you need to make wacky,
Exactly.
So just don't do it, do something else.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're too far in, it's like you're down the chute and you can't go back, and there's various reasons why, you might realize it too late.
Right. You get to that point, you're like, oh man, I don't have another way the story can go.
Yeah, so we got to, so I'm trying to...
Or you've already spent a lot of time and you're subject to the sunk cost fallacy of like, well, we've already put so much time into making this thing work. If we just push it further,
totally.
And I mean, sometimes that pays off. Like, I mean, with the squad stuff in Republic Commando, I felt like there was a point at which we hadn't pushed it far enough where you felt like we had fully committed to making the thing work.
It's a tricky call because you got to have some faith in there.
Exactly, and you've got to have the vision and be able to convince others that you can get it there. and you can sort of believe that somebody was pushing, like, no, we could. This will totally work. I don't know who that would be, but or just like, well, we've got all these levels mocked out. We can make it work.
I mean,
like
if we
starting from scratch, who knows what we'll come up with? We don't know where to go.
Yeah. Oh, there were some rough conversations when we were worried about that squad stuff for sure.
Oh yeah,
where it was like, oh, but I mean, like if we hadn't pushed through on that, like we wouldn't have had a game. It's such like that's a and the end of Starfighter 1 is also a good example, I think, right, where it's like we probably should have pulled the plug on that level, but it was the end. We needed to end the way we thought. It's like it was just like, oh, we got,
because that's the way the movie was going to be.
Got to power it through. So. Yeah, but just interesting reminders, I guess I'll say. Even though, like I said, I feel like we should be learning this lesson every game, and somehow we just don't. At least I don't. Other people do, and I need to, it's a good takeaway for me at least.
I mean, maybe we should at least touch on the final battle with the floating baby.
Yeah.
I thought of Eraserhead for some reason while watching that. Do you know Eraserhead? Have you seen? You've seen Eraserhead?
Yeah, but
remember there was that like goat baby thing that they nurture in the sink?
Vaguely, yeah.
Kind of made me think of that. Like, this thing is so totally out of place. Like, what the hell even is this?
Yeah.
Baby.
Does the name mean something that I'm unaware of? Because it's
nihil is nothing in Latin.
Nihil,
so I mean, I've got to figure it's got something to do with that. It's like the thing that brings nothingness.
The nothingness, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just thought like my small point about like the story of teleportation was interesting because like it shot teleportation at you. I thought that was clever how they integrated that into the boss battle.
Yeah, no, that was cool. Yeah.
And there's that little room earlier in that space that you talked about underneath that first kind of or second area where to get out of it you have to go and turn on these 3 weird switches and then you create a teleporter,
right?
Which I also thought was like, oh cool, that's what the G-Man has been harvesting or the scientists have been figuring out that technology, or they're sharing. This is all my headcanon, right? They're sharing information with the aliens or some crazy thing, I don't know. So I was making all that stuff up, but I appreciated that they had teleportation fully in the boss battle as well. But it's just like there were a lot of interesting ideas, I think, in that battle. If you just abstractly take away the flying baby part of it for a second, but not great telegraphing, I'd say. With like there's just a lot of trial and error. Like the things
those nodules on the side that you had to shoot.
Yeah, and then
I figured that out pretty fast, but I did and then you had the blue bolts that you like really had to avoid because those did a ton of damage. So things like that I had to learn trial and error. But I did really like the teleporting thing because then it would take you to a place where there were some new resources usually.
Oh, yeah. It was very clever,
and it would chase you around.
Yeah. I mean, so I thought I got the impression that you had to shoot the orange lights around his head, or was that just doing damage? Did you just have to do damage to him?
If you do enough damage to him, he basically absorbs those and heals himself, but ultimately they're gone if you shoot the orange triangle things.
No,
so
yeah.
I think those come out of the orange triangles, and then they're floating around his head.
No,
so
once
if you don't take those things out, you'll be able to gather resources as long as
right. Once
you die.
I meant after the triangles were gone.
Yeah, I think I just shot him. I didn't worry about focusing on those at all.
Okay, that's why it took me so long. I was shooting those things for some dumb reason because I thought
it's very hard to hit them. So I decided.
And there wasn't even any feedback, so I think I just eventually.
Yeah, you can jump up to be higher.
Yeah,
I did that at one point accidentally. I was mostly just shooting him from below, though.
Oh, even at the end.
All the way at the end, yeah. All the way through the game.
Okay, because I had remembered from my first playthrough, because I got good at the long jump. If you kind of skate around down there and you do the long jump a lot, he can't really basically ever hit you. And if you hit those jump pads, you basically are jumping all over the room. And if you hit his orange glowing thing when his head's open, like, he goes down fast. Oh,
really?
So you jump above him.
I just was painting him with the rocket launcher and
just hitting him directly.
Yeah,
so you never even shot into his open head?
No.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know you could do that. I thought you had to use the open head thing to do it, but that just must do more damage.
Probably does more damage.
Because I think
I was hitting with rocket after rocket. At one point, I did switch to that sort of blue light plasma gun.
Yeah.
And that was what I actually took down the last of his orange orbs with. I kind of noticed they just started disappearing. And then I painted him with the rocket launcher and just started hitting him again and again and again, and ultimately he kind of floated up and away and disappeared, and I guess I teleported, I guess is what happens at that point. I can't remember exactly.
Well, did he do his whole big explosion thing? I mean,
yeah.
Hard to, with the whole,
yeah.
Where he just self-destructs and
right, exactly. Yeah, no, he kind of floated up and exploded way above me.
Yeah.
So I couldn't see it super well. So maybe you actually had a better view. But
I was on the ground when he exploded, but it is pretty far up there. And all the electricity happens and all that stuff. Yeah.
It sort of feels like the accident in reverse. From the
right.
Sort of a visual,
that's a good point. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's kind of a full circle. Nice. I never caught that before. I guess I thought you had. I'm surprised now that you can kill him without shooting into his head. In this day and age, we definitely always would build in backdoor boss logic like that, right? Because if people didn't figure it out for some reason, we wanted them to be able to just whittle him down. But it was kind of fun to shoot him in his open head and jump up there above him.
Messed up.
And in that case, I only took like 2 shots, I think, and he was.
Okay, yeah. It took me a ton of ammo.
Yeah,
a ton of rockets to blast away at him. But I had gotten very, very wary of all those jump pads. Like, I had such a hard time controlling my descent. I wasn't good at the air steering generally. It had no shadow support to tell me where I was going to land, so I kind of had to guess.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So there's some technological stuff that was missing that we kind of know from even 3D platforms at the time. I mean, the Rayman 2 or Rayman 3D, I guess it was on the PlayStation 2 in the first year. It would have been around this time, maybe a little later, I guess. But there was stuff that was kind of solving these problems.
Yeah, there's some things they could have done. Yeah.
And they just didn't have that, and I missed it.
Well, then we just have the very epilogue thing, the very end with the G-Man himself, and
which is good, which I think is a full coda to the game that I think helps cement it, because a lot of games just kind of end. Certainly at this time, kind of end at their moment of maximum intensity. I mean, System Shock 2 basically does. I guess there's a slight epilogue, non-interactive epilogue in that one, where you're basically watching a movie, of the people in the spaceship that got away or whatever. But at the time, it was kind of rare to have your story actually have. I mean, the Doom games, for example, just kind of end, you killed the big bad thing. You telefrag the big thing from beyond in Quake or whatever. There's no...
Shub Niggurath or whatever it is.
Shub Niggurath. There is no, end of it. It just kind of goes to the credits. I killed the bad thing, and now it's over. And this game has this time with this guy that you still don't really know who he is or what he's, and he gives you a pointless choice, which is, I don't know,
Yeah, a little bit of a cop out at the very end to have that happen. Yeah,
I did find though that you could get death screens like that at various points. One of the things I did was in the room where the scientist teleports you, with the big device and those flying creatures that appear for the first time, you can actually shoot out the glass and shoot the scientist, and it'll
I got that other places too before in the game earlier. Anytime when there's an NPC that you need a critical path, you'll get that if he dies.
Gotcha.
Which I would accidentally blow up my NPCs all the time for various reasons. But it did. You're right. It did. It was a nice, interesting, mysterious, and kind of, intriguing kind of capper to the whole thing, where you're like, this sort of was all going somewhere.
Right.
And I kind of want to know what happened, does something happen next, And,
yeah, it definitely sets up a sequel.
Yeah.
Even if the sequel doesn't really start from this.
Oh, June. Sorry. You heard the dog?
Yeah, I heard June. It doesn't, the sequel doesn't really start from a point that seems like it makes sense with this.
No, you're right.
It just starts in City 17 and you're getting off a train and it's like, well, I thought I worked for these guys. I thought I was in, that I accepted a contract, or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's actually a pretty big departure from what the heck's going on.
Freeman, yeah.
I guess what they did, I might have to go back and play it again, but I guess what they did is they just basically had a time gap where they had enough time pass where it's feasible that you would not know what's going on. Because you kind of come from the cold, right, or something.
Right.
You've been gone.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. You can make up your own story for what happened.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right? Like that's what. Yeah.
Maybe he did maybe Gordon Freeman did a ton of jobs for the G-Man, and they finally got tired of it. Faked his own death.
Yeah, I want to play that game, the one that's in between. Yeah. 1.5.
Yeah, Freeman, the missing years.
Half-Life Free Man. That's the title.
Oh, God.
No. Yeah.
No, I think with that we should maybe take a break. I gotta recover.
Yeah, that's me too.
Okay.
All right.
We'll come back in a sec.
Okay.
Welcome back from the break. As we normally do, we'd like to kind of take some takeaways from Half-Life. It's kind of an enormous game, and there's probably a lot of takeaways we might take. But let's keep it down to a couple, 2, 3, whatever. What do you got, sir?
My two. I really just have two that I'd focus on. I think I've said it in every episode pretty much that. This has been great for me personally to replay because it's been a long time and I'd forgotten how seminal it really is. Like, there's just, like I think I joked, like, you could teach a class just on this game, I think, entirely, because every level has something to learn. So there's a lot of little things. But the two big ones for me were fully realized sense of place as a shooter and as a
My
world.
number one, yeah, for sure.
And then the other one is just the level design, the connected level design. Just as a level designer myself, or ex-level designer these days, just the, not even just, like, it goes with sense of place, but just the cleverness and flow and pacing and interconnectedness and looping back around on itself and all of the just sort of logistics of the best levels in this game. They're levels made today that don't even get close to this,
Sure.
And so, yeah, but let's talk about sense of place, if that was yours as well. I mean, that one, it's just like every level has a memorable theme. Feels like I'm in Black Mesa, Black Mesa is a memorable place now because of this game.
It feels like, they also commit to, motivating some of the stuff with story as well to really strengthen the sense of place. So, like, you go outside, you're in these steep cliffs and all this stuff. You're fighting a helicopter and all these Marines, and, like, it all just... It may not be, like, from the... if you really examine it closely, there's probably a point where you go, well, wait a minute, how did these tanks get here? Like, there's a lot of points where you'll go... Like, okay, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me, if you stop and spend a lot of time thinking about it, like, how does this connect together? But, as we talked about previously, there's enough sense of it that it does at least make sort of a prima facie case for, like, it making sense. Yeah. And, that consistency of that worldview really sells it, and I think you have to have enough of that. You don't have to have the backstory of the tank commander written in a journal to make a place make sense. It's enough to place a tank there and have it be in a place where you're like, okay, well, this is a choke point, which is naturally good for gameplay. So naturally they'd put a tank here. And, like, the player writes his own story at that point of, like, they wheeled this tank in here or whatever. Or, places where the Marines drop through. Oh, now there's an elevator shaft and the Marines are dropping down. Of course they are. Like, how are they getting there? Who cares?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter at that point. It's enough, to make a situation where the AI can look interesting, because the AI is kind of my other thing, where the AI can look interesting in a space and therefore look smart and therefore look motivated, which ties into the sort of realism of this world, regardless of what the world actually looks like.
Yeah, I think our points are all interrelated, and I think that's why this is such a brilliant game, because that's the case, because everything is interconnected and stands up because of the other things. But to your point of, like, part of my level design point and making the space feel real and lived in and interconnected in a logical way, even though it's not always logical, they do that enough throughout the game to give you the perception of that. So when you, like you said, when the Marines come in, you don't question it, because you've already been presented with a pretty cohesive world. So you just take it for granted that it's gonna, that it's fine. You know what I mean? Because they've already got you. You already believe. I think from day one, no pun intended, well, pun intended, from day one, they get you, right? And after that, you're so blown away. You're like, give me more. You clearly know what you're doing. Give me another level, and the levels are designed so well, and then the sense of place is all there because you feel like it's a real. And then the other one that I forgot that I guess relates to, you kind of mentioned, is the sense of place and the storytelling almost always directly relates to gameplay, right? Which is which reinforces it. It's the best way to do it. And so many games, myself included being guilty of this, so often the story does not relate directly to the gameplay, and you notice,
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely true. And I think that, the other thing that kind of was keying into there was that, you need your AI to be good at, we talked about kind of the rules behind making decent AI, but even the cooperative AI doesn't push too far. They go to a certain point, and then they support to the fact that they can't go further, but with just a voice line, like, I guess this is where I get off, or whatever. And they just don't push to the point where they'll look dumb, at a certain point, and part of that is pacing. Like, there's a lot of reasons why you make those design choices that are not purely technical. There are reasons why you don't want an extra gun in there fighting stuff, because that's the player's job. For example, with Barneys, right? Mm-hmm. But they took a human AI that they would have needed for the Marines and stuff like that, and the pathfinding and making those look reasonable. And they used it on, the Barneys and the scientists, and, just having that human scale and AI that felt reasonable for the roles that they inhabited. It was great. Like, you don't expect in this strenuous situation that you're going to have an interesting conversation with a scientist. So they don't have to do more. They don't have to have dialogue trees that make any sense. They don't have to have any kind of emotions. So they did just enough with their AI to support, like, in a very similar way to sort of the level design. Like, well, it doesn't make sense if you really stop and think. Same thing with the AI. They don't really make a lot of sense, if you stop and, well, what, would he really behave this way? Well, no, it's good enough. It's certainly at the time way further than anybody else was taking that sort of thing. So it stood out from that standpoint too.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think those all swim around the same subjects, really.
Yeah, they really do all touch on one another.
It's a very cohesive game, for the most part. I think exception of maybe the end.
Yeah, the end. I mean, I do think
cohesive in its own way, but
yeah, I think that they also do, and it actually, I mean, it was so cohesive that it stood out when it wasn't. Certainly the ending, but also like we talked about that sort of
that's a good point.
It would stand out a bit of as a bit of a sore thumb at the points where it didn't quite get there. Those were very noticeable. So, I think that they really delivered on that. All their premises very, very well, and it was very rare that you didn't get kind of swept up in it. So, and I think that's all part of it. But yeah, fantastic game. And still a pleasure to revisit here.
It is. It was still
20 years in.
I really was compelled to play. I look forward to, and it's not that I don't look forward to the other ones we've been playing.
Yeah.
I think it's just when you're playing Planescape or something really long, and we're playing on such a short timeline, even though we extended that one. Like, it's hard to sometimes soldier through it, But this one was pretty effortless, I'd say. You've been crunching, but yeah.
Well, even so, I found the time, And, and
I
caught
noticed,
up and did a bunch at once and stuff like that. So
I always look at your Steam hours played when we're playing to see like how far off I am. But you ended up at 26 hours. Did you leave it running at some point?
I did.
Okay, because I was at 12, and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, I definitely do that all the time.
So I can't.
Sometimes I'm playing. I work in Unity, and the build times.
Yeah, right. You're
and so I'll have it running, and I'll just leave it running all day long, and I'll do my work, and then at some point I'll be like, okay, now I need to do something that takes up more CPU resources or whatever, and I'll close it, but. It'll just sit, or I'll forget about it. I mean, sometimes just honestly forget it's there in the background.
All right, I can't use that anymore then. That's not accurate.
It's not accurate. Yeah, no, it's not been accurate. I did the same thing with Final Fantasy IX, and it was like, oh, I let that run overnight. I'd come down and be like, oops, I didn't mean to leave that running. I just forgot.
I like... Total side topic. I like that my Steam record is accurate for some reason.
That's because you're an idiot.
Yeah, that's. I'm OCD. I like to go to a game and see. Okay, how long have I played that game?
How long does that really take? That's very important.
It is.
Do you have graphs and charts?
For self goals. Oh, you see my Excel sheet. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see how it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
So onward. We have some feedback. We should announce at least one of our guests. I think we're confirmed enough to do that.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, yeah. So we weren't really sure. Valve is an interesting beast, so we weren't really sure what we were going to be able to do with this because they're typically it's mixed as far as how vocal they are. But we did reach out to Mark Laidlaw, who is one of the writers, if not kind of the main writer, on Half-Life 2, Portal. Like he worked on everything there. He's now no longer at Valve. He recently left and is now independent. So maybe
last year, I think.
Yeah, so maybe he's a little more interested in talking, but he seems very interested, and we've lined him up. So we're going to record him, next weekend, and so he's going to be on. We do potentially have a second guest that I haven't fully confirmed, so we might actually do 2 episodes of guests, but I won't announce him until, and he still is at Valve.
We'll get that a little bit more firmed up before.
Yeah, I'll get that firmed up before we commit to that. But and if I get that confirmed, we'll announce that on Mark's podcast episode. Yep. But he's still at Valve, and he was a level designer on the game. So fingers crossed on that. So that's exciting. Mark is, as far as writers go in the gaming industry, he's definitely well known.
Among the best known for sure.
Yeah. So it's really exciting and he seems excited to be on. So, and you may or may not notice if you played along with us in the names on the locker rooms in day one. Right. Yeah. His name's on there as well as a few others. So
yes, it is. That is for...
he's an old-timer. He was 18 years, I think, at Valve alone.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Crazy, yeah.
Yeah, it's a long time. He's also written novels and stuff.
Yep. He's done other things, for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
That's exciting. But then I guess we have feedback after that, huh?
Yep.
or
Yeah.
something?
Let's dive into a few pieces of feedback. We did have one email, and we'll read a few reviews. You have the email.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll go right in. So the email is from Gamer Lawyer.
If that is your real name.
Yeah, that's a good name. Okay, email is, still a big fan of the podcast. Keep them coming. Been enjoying your playthrough of Half-Life. If Valve could only produce a third sequel, or a third sequel to anything for that matter. Yeah, they definitely hit their three. They're definitely stuck on that. I've been wondering, have you guys made it a strict rule that you'll only play older games? Do you think you'll ever tackle something from the PS3, Xbox 360 gen, or even something on PS4, Xbox One? Would love to hear your guys' opinions, opinion breakdown of more modern games like Firewatch, Breath of the Wild, etc. Either way, great job with the podcast. Yeah.
That is an interesting, it's an interesting topic. Getting this email, one of the things that came to mind was the original Assassin's Creed.
Oh, yeah.
Not because it's the best of the series or anything like that, but more because it laid out a template for much of Ubisoft's success. And to a degree, Far Cry 2 is that way as well. It has some of it.
Far Cry,
not nearly to the degree that I mean, Assassin's Creed is really like set a model.
Yeah.
Not just for Assassin's Creed, but for the Far Cry series, and also what they're doing with Watch Dogs, and there's probably another series I'm not thinking.
That's true. The Crew and like everything has
sure.
Ghost Recon, which I'm playing right now. Yeah,
they all have this kind of template of open world design, and it feels like the sort of thing where it's not as long a game as some of the other ones are, and it's one that I definitely thought of getting this question of like that's a modern game design that kind of was born in that era, and that still has very obvious adherence today. So it's one that came to mind to me pretty straight from reading that email.
It comes up from time. I mean, people have asked us before. I even had a question at work today. Somebody asked me, and I don't like. I'm open to it eventually. Once we open that can of worms, like, which ones do you play? Assassin's Creed could be one. Though I've always heard that 2 is sort of the real template, but
it's kind of there in the beginning. It's there.
Yeah, I didn't finish 1, and I haven't played any of the others, to be honest. So,
oh wow.
Yeah, it's a super.
Whereas I've played way too much Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, it's a franchise that I've just neglected and kind of regret neglecting. I don't know if I'll like it or not, but I mean, I think we're open to it. I personally feel like there's just so many older games that we can learn from on the cast and kind of with our sort of unspoken charter with this thing that we can. But I think people definitely clearly want to hear about new games. I've said before, and this is just a personal thing for me, not necessarily for Brett, that one of the rules I set up for myself that I'm kind of trying to be careful of is that I'm a first party game developer on Halo, and I want to be careful that the cast doesn't turn into a criticism of competitors. I feel like it's a little bit bad form. So, not that Assassin's Creed is specifically a competitor, but you know what I mean. Absolutely. So older games felt safer for me, at least, because they're kind of more in the history of things. But no, I'm not opposed to it for sure. Especially it'd be fun to do indie games that maybe
we
a little
do
bit
occasionally.
More.
Also, do kind of little bonus episodes where we talk
Oh, that's true. Yeah, we do some of that. You're right.
Yeah, we talked about Evil Within when we did Resident Evil. We talked about, what else have we talked about?
Wasteland.
Yeah, we did Wasteland 1 and 2. Mostly 2, but we did talk about Wasteland 1.
I still want to do...
we did Fallout.
Last Guardian, eventually. I want to get back to that.
We did talk about Last Guardian a bit. You need to go back
and play
more of it.
That's
but
right.
We did do a bonus episode on that.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's one other maybe that I'm not thinking of, but yeah, we do try to do it, but again, it is, we don't really want to kind of dump on anybody whose work maybe hasn't had time to be appreciated, and we also one of the nice things about looking at games that are older is like we know what the good ones were because they stood the test. You talk to people and they're like, "Oh, you're going to play this one. You're going to play that one." I know that Gamer Lawyer has sent us an email before saying, "How about Jet Set Radio Future?" Which is a game I actually really like, although I don't think I ever finished it. It's a cool game. It's definitely one of those, I got to finish that someday kind of games. Might be hard to play at this point. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. But yeah, and I have emails from other folks saying, hey, you should play this, you should play that. So it does feel... Yeah,
we definitely want to keep doing bonus episodes. So I think that's good.
Certainly in 20 years we'll be playing PS4 games.
Yeah, no.
Welcome to episode 682 of Dev Game Club.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll see. Fingers crossed. I'll be insane by then if we make it that far.
Yeah, my hands won't even work anymore.
You will have killed me.
All right, let me take the next review, and this one I think goes back a ways because I think it might be from Canada, and I only caught up to it at some point. Anyway, it's from Lucas Rizzoli, who, full disclosure, I've met in person a while back. We follow each other on Twitter. He says, analysis and history of older games, well worthwhile. Listen to these two friends, game developers and lifelong game players, recount their playthroughs of important and influential games from the 90s and early aughts. Brett and Tim share anecdotes, insights, and theories, frankly and in good humor. Their stories and interviews with other developers, from directors to quality assurance, show that there's lots to learn from and about these games even 20-plus years later. Whether or not one plays along with the episodes, Dev Game Club is worthwhile for anyone who enjoys video games. So, and cool. I know it's from Canada because he used a U in humor, so or two U's really. That's what we're trying to do. I mean, the interviews have been great for us. I know, and we say that just about every time they come up. It's like, oh my god, the interviews are so much fun. I'm looking forward to getting the chance to talk to Mark Laidlaw, who I don't believe I've ever had a chance to meet. So that'll be
me neither. Yeah. I'm glad he mentioned the variety of developers. I think we need to do more of that too. I'm glad we're getting Mark on as a writer and then a level designer because we've had primarily kind of leads and directors and stuff, but which is, I'm not complaining about. That's great. We've been lucky. But I'm glad we had some QA folks on with Reed and Darren, and I'm so glad Darren told that story about killing Darth Vader.
That was awesome.
Because that was such an infamous story around the pit at the forever.
Yeah.
And then I'm glad we immortalized it on the path.
Someday we're gonna have to tell your Risk story.
Oh man, someday I have to actually make that documentary. Oh, yeah.
Those tapes are probably...
Oh, wait, you said Risk, but you're talking about diplomacy, right?
Diplomacy.
Yeah, diplomacy, yeah.
Oh, man.
Someday I will announce on the podcast when I have all that footage. I just need to put it into some form. So I will, I'll get it out there.
I know when it's, some of the things that people said and how they play that game. That's a crazy thing. Diplomacy is one of those games, for those who aren't board gamers, it's one of those big games that just takes forever to play. It's the game, the great game, I guess, between countries of
it's all
espionage and warfare and all that stuff, and it takes a long time to play, and people typically set it up and play over days or even weeks, although there are tournaments and stuff where you can go and play a couple of games in a day or whatever, but then you're more focused. There's a lot of kind of off-board play where you're making alliances, and that's very much part of the game. It's a huge thing. So anyway, for those who aren't familiar.
Yeah, and we did a big game in the QA pit back in the day. This was probably 97 or something like that, and I filmed the whole thing with interviews and every step along the way, with every person that got kicked out and backstabbed by somebody, and I got on film as people were backstabbing each other and confessing. And so Dan Connors, who was part of the game, I believe, who is now running.
Oh, he was. He definitely was. Yeah, I remember him. An anecdote that I heard.
Yeah, he started
co-founded Telltale. I don't think he's there anymore.
No, I found out recently that he actually still is. He came back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
He took a break, I guess.
Yeah, anybody gets burnt out after over a decade.
Yeah,
at that one
but some hilarious stuff in there.
Yeah, some great stuff. All right, you go ahead with our next one.
Okay, so review from Bry Anderson 66. Maybe.
Yeah, it's
is the maybe part of that? The parentheses.
That is your real name.
That is your real name. Yeah, Bry Anderson. Okay. Have you heard the good news? Brett and Tim dig deep on the design and flow of your favorite games of yesteryear, always bringing fresh, experienced eyes to some truly great games. Come for the games, stay for the guest cats and Augies. You made me say it.
Back on that, I know.
I don't think I said it this time, and the cat is locked out. So
the cat's locked out, but we heard some of the dog this time, so that's
always something.
And I have a fun, informative podcast by Doc16109. Not 8675309. Go figure. Anyway, it says a fun, informative podcast. This podcast from two experienced game developers marries their evident joy of playing games with an equal joy of discussing the inner workings and mechanics of the game. This is buoyed by their unique perspective as game developers. The hosts have the experience to place and discuss the context in which the games were created, including relevant trends that were occurring in the industry at the time the game was launched. Someone who was a child when these games were created, it's interesting and insightful to learn where these games fit in the larger context of the medium. In addition, Tim and Brett have such an easy and complimentary dialogue that the podcast is simply a pleasure to enjoy. He says complimentary. I do not compliment Tim, but I think he meant complimentary, in which I guess we both pick on each other enough. I don't know. But anyway, it's because we've known each other so long that we know how to pick on one another.
Ironically, I was talking to somebody today. We've never done the podcast in the same place yet, even though it's over a year. I think that's funny.
No, we will at some point.
We will. But we'll have to make a big deal out of that when we do it.
That's right. Well, at that point, we should play something like couch co-op for the game.
Yeah, good point. That's a perfect idea. Yeah, we haven't done any
an early couch co-op game like Toe Jam and Earl or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I was the person I was talking to was Kai, who's a friend of the show, who I mentioned it before, where they have their own game club that they do on the side just for their own fun, and they were playing Planescape, and he was just bringing up again that we haven't really done any multiplayer of any kind, right? And we've debated it, like even fighting games or something. So we'll get there. We do need to figure that out because we have kind of big swaths of games that we haven't touched.
Well, it's certainly one of the ones we're talking about is something that we could consider and would fit to play multiplayer.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility for us.
Oh, you mean for our next one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Or in a near future.
Near future. Yeah.
We're still debating our next game, so it's a good time to shoot in emails. We're about done with the review and section and for the podcast generally this week. But a good time to send in like those suggestions of like, oh, have you thought about this or that, to devgameclub@gmail.com, or hit me up on Twitter at devgameclub. I am at Brett_Duville on Twitter, and he is
at Tim Longo Jr. with the JR.
And I imagine after our next episode, we'll probably have something to tell you as far as the next game. But I am really looking forward to the most important part, which is getting a chance to talk with Mark Laidlaw. That'll be really fun, and I'm glad we're able to work that out. And I think there's some crazy time zone madness with that as well, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, he might be back.
He might be back because he was in Hawaii or something.
Yeah, I think he's going to be back here. Yeah.
Okay, good. That'll make it a lot easier. So it'll be just me. You two will be in the same time zone, so that'll at least help. But I think that's it for the cast this week. Our outro music is fan music from Ficus, also known as @giant_rat on Twitter. So go ahead and give him a follow if you're interested.
Very cool.
It's cool. It's nice
Thank
to have
you, sir.
And our professional chocolatier, oh my God, I've forgotten the name. It was Blue Bandana chocolate.
Oh, I have a square almost every day.
And I've had so much
through it. Yeah,
so good. Anyway, Thanks so much. We love hearing from our fans and listeners, and we will talk to you next time. Good night.
Good night.